Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight, the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink, bane of bullies, hero to dogs and small children everywhere. Okay. So here is Thursday, November 10th, Wall Street Journal. This was the first print edition after the election. You can see the headline, A New Political Order, and there are a bunch of kind of analysis pieces. What does this mean? Here's the Times. Here's your paper's first print edition after Trump's election. Democrats, students, and foreign allies face the reality of a Trump presidency. Now, if you substituted Trump presidency with, I don't know, terminal cancer diagnosis, it would not change the meaning of this. I mean, that's advocacy, isn't it? Yes.
The New York Times.
Because it was unfair. So your piece came out, and I was heartened as a lifetime reader of the New York Times. I thought, boy, someone's being kind of honest about this. There's no ideological diversity, so they're off the rails, and they should know, and you pointed it out. Here's today's lineup on the Times website as of 4:30 p.m. There are 6 top headlines here, and 5 of them are pretty aggressively anti-Trump. Trump's tough trade talk could danger American factories. Opinion, really, you're blaming transgender people for Trump. Trump's breezy calls to world leaders leave diplomats aghast. And then this, rigged or not, election positions Trump to shape rules on how you vote. In other words, it's Trump who's calling the election rigged, when, of course, it's liberals. It's Hillary and Jill Stein who are actually challenging the election results. This seems like more of the same to me. Now, when you say that the journalists who walk in the front door of the Times building are doing their best to be fair, I would believe you, except I know for a fact that's not true because I read their Twitter feeds, and I want to give you some examples. Now, these are not opinion columnists. These are not Gail Collins' Twitter feeds. These are Michael Barbaro, for example, who's a straightforward news reporter. Here's one. This is November 15th. Pardon me for asking, but what qualifies Jared Kushner to have a seat at the presidential table? Huh. There's Eric Lipton, another reporter. White House's QVC. It has started. Here's Peter Baker. For a new president from reality television, a cabinet selection that resembles a pageant. Liam Stack, and I'm quoting now, the Electoral College was meant to stop men like Trump from taking office. Are you kidding? These are news reporters saying this stuff?
Yeah, I think it's outrageous.
And here are ones that particularly bothered me because they suggest not just the personal politics on the part of the reporter, but what they believe the mission of the Times is. This is from Michael Barbaro, November 9th. This is Election Day. Quote, we had fearless journalism throughout 2016. Voters wanted what they wanted. In other words, we tried to keep this guy from getting elected, but he did anyway. Peter Baker, same sentiment. This is recently. Real scandal isn't what the media didn't report. It's what it did, and readers didn't care. In other words, we tried to stop Trump from getting elected, but he got elected. Wait, don't blame us. That suggests they don't understand the mission of a newspaper, which is to bring you the news, not to affect the outcome of a political race. Here's my honest, and you're not responsible for this, so I don't mean to bark at you about it, but where are the editors here? I mean, if I was the New York Times and my editors were tweeting crap like that, I would say, you stop that right now or I'm firing you. Why don't they do that?
I don't know. I don't.
A bunch of consequences of this, and they're all bad, in my opinion. One, it undermines the business model of the New York Times, I think, which is based on its credibility as an impartial and accurate news source. It destroys that. But it also empowers the alternative media that everyone in your world is so upset about. They say, well, people are getting their news from these non-legitimate sites. And there's some truth in that, by the way. Why is that happening? Because legitimate so-called sites like the New York Times or NBC News or the Washington Post have so debased themselves that people feel like, I'm going somewhere else. Do you see that phenomenon?
Not as much as you do. I think Fox News has debased itself.
Here's the difference. On this show, which is the one thing I can speak for, I'm totally upfront about my opinions.
Oh, sure. No,
I never pretend that I think anything. Well, I think our news is kind of above. I mean, I'm not getting in the position of defending a company. I can only defend my show. I think Fox News is fair. But this show, I'm totally upfront. So if Michael Barbaro comes out and says, you know what, I'm kind of a left-wing political activist, fine. I have no problem with that. I'm happy to read him. But when he lies to me and says I'm a straight news reporter, why shouldn't I be offended? Yeah. His name is Kurt Eichenwald, and he joins us now. Kurt, thanks all for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been reading your stuff for, 20 years probably. But in the last year, I've noticed an increasing, I think it's fair to say, partisan turn from you. And so I looked up your bio, and it describes you as a senior writer at Newsweek, which suggests journalism. Do you believe that you're practicing journalism?
When did you stop beating your wife? What are you talking about?
Well, I'll show you what I'm talking about. I read your Twitter feed, and this is the kind of stuff I'm reading on it. At one point, you ask of conservatives, why do they hate America? You describe Trump as, quote, stupid and lazy. You refer to dumbass Trumpers. You say this to Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, F you. You say this to Trump voters, go F yourself.
I mean, One of the things I want to make sure of, you have a real habit of taking a lot of things out of context.
I can read you the tweets.
And so if you're going to talk about
a
tweet, let's talk about a tweet. Read me what it says, and we can talk about it. But let's not just sit here and take a couple of words here and there. Now, if you're talking about the
would you want me to read you some of your tweets?
Read me one. Let's talk about the one that bothers you the most.
Well, I mean, there are a lot, and it's not that they bother me.
But I can't answer a question about a lot of tweets. Give me an answer. Give me a question.
Well, you're entirely entitled to your opinion. My only point is that you ought to label yourself as what you are, which is an advocate. And so you say things like this. How can Trumpsters defend a president-elect?
Let's stop for a second. You won't give me an example.
I'm trying to give you one right now.
Then give me. Here, you know what? Let's play the game another way. I spent a little while just sort of doing some research on you.
Why don't you answer? Let me ask you this question, if you would.
Tucker Carlson falsehoods.
Okay.
And I can sit here and I can read them to you one at a time.
I appreciate it.
And we can talk about what you have to say.
That's pretty good.
Or you can give me an example of what you're talking about.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. You wrote this on September 12th of this year. You said, this is a tweet, I tweet so many attacks on our bad, lazy work of the press, I doubt I'll ever be voted to win a journalism award again, which is also a humble brag, by the way. But the next day you say, quite ironically, and I'm quoting, I believe Trump was institutionalized in a mental hospital for a nervous breakdown in 1990, which is why he won't release his medical records. Do you see a little irony that on one day you're criticizing the press for being lazy and inaccurate, and the next day you yourself are being lazy and inaccurate?
Let me give you what the question is. So I'm saying, here is what I was told.
Was he in a mental hospital or not in 1990? You allege that he was. Was he or wasn't he? He wasn't.
I mean, Tucker, if you don't want me to answer the question,
I'm asking you the question. Was he in a mental hospital in 1990 or not?
But I would like to answer the question. You've made an accusation. Let me answer.
No, I read your tweet.
So now, up until that point, prior to the election,
this is a very long story. You said he was in a mental hospital in 1990. Was he or wasn't he?
Can I finish,
it's a really simple
Tucker?
question.
If you don't
I'm asking
like
you
the
to finish.
answer,
Please answer the question.
If you don't like the answer, don't have guests. But I would really like to answer your question.
It's a simple question. Was he in a mental hospital, as you claimed, or wasn't he?
Tucker, would you like me to answer the question or not? If the answer is no, say so.
Please succinctly answer the question. You're filibustering with this weirdness.
If you won't let me answer the question. We can go back and say, oh, here are Tucker Carlson falsehoods. Let's go through them one at a time.
Kurt,
I urge
you said the guy was in a mental hospital.
You can put them on the Fox News website. Do you want me to answer the question or not? Just give me a yes or no. Do you want me to answer the question?
Yeah, I want you to answer this question. Was he in a mental hospital in 1990, as you alleged, or was he not?
Let me answer the question.
Go ahead.
Look, you're not fooling anybody. You're trying to stop me from giving the answer. So let me give you the answer.
This is a little nutty. I got to be honest. I'm asking you a very
I've also noticed
question.
earlier this week you take people off the air when you don't like what they're saying. So let's keep me on the air. Let's finish this. You're making accusations against me. I have the right to respond.
I'm reading what you wrote. You described Trump as a, quote, paranoid, unstable
nobody
man.
is getting fooled by this. You're not letting me answer the question.
Okay.
So
I think that you're humiliating yourself by your unwillingness to answer a simple question. So please answer it.
I am trying to answer the question.
Do you have evidence he was in a mental
unlike
hospital
on your world,
you?
reality is not always able to give you a yes or no answer. If you don't, look how much time we are wasting with me trying to say, let me answer your question, and you refusing to allow me to do it.
I think I would go crazy.
So I will continue.
All right.
What happens then when we get to I begin to see Trump's behavior got very normalized in the 2000s. During the presidential election, I begin to see the same behavior, the impulsiveness, the lack of sleep. I mean, that's the same thing that he was doing.
This is just stupid, Kurt. I'm sorry. Nobody's getting anything out of this. I'm asking you a plain question. You're not answering. You're filibustering. Let's move on to something else. Can you stop? This is not interesting.
No, Tucker,
let me ask.
I am not allowing you to make an accusation and then
I'm not making an accusation,
Kurt.
That is
obscene. It
asking
is not
you
journalism.
to substantiate a claim that you made.
If you want to have a dialogue, don't have guests. So
Can I just ask you one last question?
And nobody's getting fooled. You're trying to stop.
How can Newsweek employ you as a reporter, Kurt, when you're throwing lines like this around that are untrue, that you can't substantiate, when you say to the president's spokesman, F you, that's not the behavior of a reporter.
Okay, let's go here. let me take one for you. How can Fox News employ you? You really want to do this? Do you really want to play this game, or do you want me to answer?
Performance art. I've never had an interview like this in my life.
On Newsweek.com if you want. I can tweet it all out if you want. I'd like you to put it up on the Fox News website. Or you can let me answer your question.
I think you may be coming undone. How about this? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer this question. Do you have evidence that he was institutionalized in a mental hospital in 1990? 30 seconds.
Now, okay, I will say this, because it's a message I've got from people from the CIA. I know a lot of officers. I know a lot of agents. I've been in their homes, and they're really delivering this to you and to Donald Trump. These are people who have sacrificed a lot for this country. They go through into the CIA every day. They walk past that wall with 117 black stars. If you're going to say that we can't talk about the fact that there are 117 patriots whose lives have been lost serving this country, that's fine.
I'm starting to have concerns about you, Kurt.
Right now,
tell me what the secret message from the CIA is.
Who are putting their lives on the line, who are to be sources of information for the CIA. That information is coming in. That information is then being put together by analysts who are not well paid, and they do very hard work, and they do it because they are patriots.
I'm sorry, we're out of time, Kurt, and I don't mean this in a cruel way. I would have real concerns if I were one of your editors, and I mean that. I'm not calling anyone a liar, but I am saying I'm concerned about your behavior on this show tonight. But thanks a lot for joining us.
That's because you won't let me answer your questions. I don't think anybody's fooled.
Thanks a lot, Kurt. I appreciate it. My question is really simple. What would you say, and if you're a father, you may be in this position someday, what would you say to a kid applying to Harvard or any other elite school in the United States who doesn't get in because he is held to different and higher standards because of his skin color and says to you, that's unfair, because of course it is? What would your response be?
It was probably the most racially divisive election that ever occurred, and the president-elect was elected despite or maybe because of some racist rhetoric, and that trickles right down to our schools. I'm sorry.
Let me just ask, you haven't answered the question, which is, if you're against racism and racial discrimination, why are you explicitly supporting a system that penalizes people for the color of their skin, which you are? How can you say you're against racism and still penalize people because they're the wrong race?
Well, Tucker, the students who apply are not being penalized because of their race. The application process, Harvard accepts 35% of Harvard's student body. They come from private schools, while only 10% of American students go to private schools. You can look at Harvard's admittance of Northeastern students, which comprise 40% of Harvard's population, but only 17% of America lives in the Northeast. And these are all advantages that, white students will also benefit from.
No, but those are all non sequiturs, actually. Well, hold on, wait, no, I'm sorry. As a Harvard graduate, you recognize a non sequitur when you hear one. I mean, I wouldn't defend any of those things. I'm not here to advocate for them. You're here to advocate for discriminating on the basis of race. I'm not saying race is the only criterion taken into account by Harvard's admissions, but you can't tell me that a kid who has to score 540 points higher just because of his race, over which he has no control, it's an immutable characteristic, is not being discriminated against. And again, why is that fair?
Well, I think race adds a lot to a person's life experience, and it impacts them negatively.
But Asian American students are disproportionately poorer, disproportionately likely to come from public schools, disproportionately immigrants, the marginalized communities you say you speak for, and yet 540-point deficit penalty on the SAT? I mean, you're punishing the weakest, actually.
Well, actually, affirmative action benefits Asian American students.
Okay, but that's all gobbledygook. When it comes right down to it, Harvard has a quota system for Asians, and you'll deny it because it's unconstitutional, it's illegal, but it's really clear that they do. For all races, they have, for example, last year, 11.8% of their applicants were African American, 11.8% were Hispanic. That number has remained the same. It's about 20% Asian. That has remained roughly the same over 20 years as the population of college-age Asian applicants has doubled. So there's no argument, no reasonable argument against the fact that they have a quota system as they did against Jews in the 20s. And you're defending that.
Well,
why?
Tucker, they don't have a quota system. First of all, it is unconstitutional. But secondly, when I was at Harvard, the percentage of Asian Americans was about 16 to 17%. Today it's 21%. So it's actually increased by 30% just since the time that I graduated. So it can't possibly be a quota system unless the quota numbers are changing, and then it can't be a quota system.
Unless the applicant pool has doubled, which it has. It's doubled. And that number has not doubled, as you know. And by the way, the numbers for other racial groups have remained constant because there is a quota system. Everybody's aware of it. Let me read you a quote from a man who does this for a living. His name is Brian Taylor. He runs a business that helps Asian students get into elite colleges. He said this to the Boston Globe last year. He said, "We will make them, the Asian applicants, appear less Asian when they apply." Now, why would he do that? He does that because colleges don't want too many Asians. And you know this really well. And yet you're defending it. I don't understand that at all. They're discriminating against Asians. They're open about it. Everybody knows it. And yet that's okay because why?
Well, like I said, you know, there isn't a quota system because the numbers have actually increased. And I believe they've actually increased for
not proportional
Latino
to the
and
increase in
African-American students
applications.
as well.
No, actually they
you're
haven't.
right about that. But, you know, Tucker, that is a whole nother segment worth exploring about this arms race of parents trying to get their kids into schools and applying to far more colleges now than they did before. So the population has not doubled, but the number of applications that are being sent out has. And colleges like this because it boosts their numbers, makes them seem more selective.
That's actually, let me correct you there. The population has grown dramatically, and when you add the international applicants, it's not just people pushing Harvard on the Common App. It's people who are qualified to go to Harvard with 800 SAT scores and straight A's and head of student council who are not getting in because of their race. Now, I mean, you haven't addressed this, though. If college counselors are counseling their students to pretend they're not Asian, and they do this for a living, they have no incentive to lie about it, you've got discrimination going on. And you're pretending it's not there for some weird ideological reason. And what is that weird ideological reason exactly? Because racism has taken place in America in years past?
I think these are anecdotal. I certainly put down that I was Asian when I applied to Harvard. I got in. As a Harvard admissions interviewer, most of the students that I've interviewed who have gotten in have been Asian. So, you know, from my own personal experience, I haven't seen that. But I think the reason why some people might do that is because there is so much divisiveness where people are being told that, okay, if you are Asian, you're being discriminated against, and there are consultants who will make money off of, you know, the desire of parents to give their children the best opportunity to get into college. And
it's the parents'
and maybe
fault,
they believe that will heighten their chances. But I don't think it will.
Because when Princeton University, in a study that I think we both accept is real, says that you need to score 540 points higher than other students in order to have the same chance of getting in, I think it's a rational conclusion to believe that there's discrimination going on. Let me ask you one last question. You noted a bunch of painful periods of American history. Both of us abhor them. So the Japanese internment, slavery, Jim Crow, we all agree those are bad. Why are they bad? They're bad because they're examples of people in power hurting American citizens based on their race. How is that different from what Harvard is doing?
Well, Tucker, a lot of people will say that affirmative action in which African-American and Latino students who are given admission over Asian students who have higher scores, they say that that's reverse discrimination. So then what do we say about the 60% of white students at Harvard who also are getting into Harvard despite having significantly lower scores than Asians?
That's bad. You know, I mean, I'm not here to defend that. I believe in the meritocracy. I asked you a simple question. So is it okay to discriminate against people on the basis of their race?
So why are we focusing on the 22% versus the 60%?
Well, because the numbers are so... I'll tell you exactly why. Because it is the hardest position to be in as an Asian student of all categories. If you are an Asian girl, it's harder to get into these colleges than if you're anyone else. And so we're picking the worst example. I could pick many examples, but my question remains the same, which is it okay to discriminate on the basis of race? I was raised to believe it's not. You apparently think it is. Is it?
No, I think that we have to recognize that we don't live in a vacuum and that racial discrimination still exists and that we have to account for the fact that some people have a head start. And if you're going to advocate for a race-neutral policy, you're basically reinforcing the head start that some people already have.
Wait,
and
so you're saying
action is imperfect, but you know it's needed. It's part of the solution.
Is it racial discrimination to not let somebody into college based on his race? Can we just agree on that? Is it?
If that is the sole criteria that someone is not admitted into a college, then there would be something wrong with that, but that's just not the way that colleges work. They are not admitting students based solely on race. There are other factors that are involved. And, you know, I've talked about a lot of others that have benefited people, such as legacy, such as whether or not you went to a private school, if you're from the Northeast, and there are a lot of advantages.
Those are non sequiturs. I mean, you're diverting from the question, and it's this, and you know that you don't have an answer to this. But if racial discrimination is wrong, and I believe it is, then it's just wrong. I mean, there's a moral element here, I think, right?
I agree that racial discrimination is wrong, but to say that you're starting off from a clean slate as an applicant when, you know, if you are a Mexican-American student and you're worried that your parents might get deported by the next president, you know, you have a significantly different experience than
you know what?
Caucasian
Can I
students.
say something really clear? Children are not responsible for the sins of previous ages, okay? No 18-year-old Asian or black or Hispanic kid is responsible for slavery or Jim Crow or the sins of America. I'm sorry. And to punish them for those things is grotesque. You would agree with that, right?
I would agree with that, but then why do bad things seem to happen disproportionately to these races that were subjected to racism in the past? You want to say that racism doesn't exist, but
well, of course I'm not. I'm saying that you're committing racism is what I'm saying.
Is because, you know, African Americans are being, you know, killed, even if they're not armed. I mean, this is something that's happening.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I'm
race-based.
just saying the answer is not more racism.